Hi everyone, a very warm welcome to today's webinar on fighting modern slavery and supply chains, news, industry developments, and updates to the Slavery and Trafficking Risk Template, or the STRT for short. My name is Sarah Carpenter. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Development Committee for the STRT. I've been involved in the Development Committee since our inception in October 2016. In my day-to-day work, I help companies protect workers and their supply chain from slavery and human trafficking. I work for Assent Compliance, which is a leader in supply chain data management. Our online platform automates the supplier engagement aspects of corporate human trafficking and slavery initiatives.
Hi, and I'm Lydia Hultquist, and I'm also STRT co-chair, and I'm actually the founder and moderator for the Silicon Valley Conflict Minerals and Human Trafficking Forum. This forum actually began back in 2013, and with participation from legal members from several tech companies in Silicon Valley, and it got gathering just a shared approach to understanding Section 1502 of Dodd-Frank. From there, we expanded the scope in 2016 to include human trafficking. And so our forum meets quarterly, and many of the members, folks from Assent and various other industry experts have spoken at our forum. I joined the committee last year and became co-chair early part of this year. So just a quick overview of our agenda for today. We're gonna a quick overview about STRT, and then just review some of the changes, revisions to version 1.3, and then go to call to action, and then allow some time for questions and answers.
Perfect, thanks Lydia. And before we go any further, I just wanted to highlight a few housekeeping points for those who are on the line. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of that recording along with the slides following the webinar. As Lydia just noted, we will close the webinar with a period for questions and answers. So I really do encourage you to submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll address them at the end. You can do so using the panel on the right-hand side of your screen.
Okay, so just an overview of the initiative. So Social Responsibility Alliance, SRA. So our mission is to provide companies with data tools to build socially responsible supply chains in response to regulatory requirements. And so again, overall vision seeks to provide trusted open source tools that facilitate the collection of complete responsible sourcing data from supply chains. So what is the template? I know many of you are already familiar with STRT, but for those of you that are new to this, it's a free template used to assist companies in complying with human trafficking regulations. There are 23 questions and a request for supporting documentation. Similar to those of you that are familiar with CMRT, it's universal, very easy to use. As a user of this, I can vouch for that. The reach is, we're estimating at this time is about 10,000 suppliers at this point. It's in the Microsoft Excel format, and you can download it at any time. It's sraglobal.org. So scoring at a glance, so how to generate human trafficking risk score. So 3 things to keep in mind: the methodology and guiding principles and some of the sample algorithms. So how does this assist companies, and companies that you work for? So it's an integral, it's a risk-based approach to due diligence because, 1, it identifies risk and regulatory compliance at the individual supplier level. It gives insight into opportunities for risk mitigation and also follow-up action. It fosters constructive dialogue with suppliers and creates awareness for core values and commitment to human rights. It strengthens public disclosures by showing year-over-year improvement. And lastly, it keeps stride with new research and new regulations. So this is just an overview of STRT in the news and on the web, just a quick snapshot. And also some of the events that STRT has they've presented. So who maintains the STRT? So the committee actively maintains, reviews, and updates the STRT. And the committee is composed of a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 40 members, and which includes industry, including industry associations, and ideally represented by a mix: manufacturers, raw material suppliers, wholesalers, retailers, as well as other interested bodies, including NGOs, labor unions, governmental and UN agencies, academic institutions, and service providers. And how are updates made to the STRT? So as you can see on here, the committee receives proposed revisions from members and external stakeholders, so suppliers, retailers, government, academics, NGOs, service providers, etc. The committee will discuss, debate, and consider each proposed revision, and then vote on each proposed revision. If there's a majority vote yes, then the revision will pass. And then this will be updated on an annual basis.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lydia. So, that was a really great overview of the STRT that you've just provided and how companies are using the STRT today to drive change and awareness in their supply chain. If I may, I wouldn't mind actually just jumping back a few slides here and kind of calling attention just maybe to a couple of these guides that the STRT was featured in that I think those on the line might be interested actually in perusing on their own, because I think they're a great resource for any company that's looking to tackle these issues in their supply chain. The one that I'll certainly start with is the one on the top left-hand corner, which was compiled by the Ethical Trading Initiative as well as Ergon Associates, and it's a good practice note for the private sector on managing risks associated with modern slavery. And in my reading of it, I would say that it's a really great resource for companies, again, who are looking to ensure that their programs meet good practice and continue to evolve. Even beyond that, there have been a slew of initiatives who have sought to compile all the great tools that exist for companies to support them in their due diligence programs. GBCAT is one such initiative supported by the ILO and others. The STRT, of course, is featured there, along with other tools that those on the line I think could benefit from looking at with a view to seeing whether they could be leveraged within their own programs for augmentation. So, Lydia, thanks again for that introduction. So, an important focus for today's webinar, of course, is on the latest version of the STRT. So really an important mandate, the central and key mandate of the Development Committee is to ensure that the Slavery and Trafficking Risk Template keeps stride with new research and new learning in terms of what really works when it comes to addressing slavery and human trafficking and supply chains. And also, even beyond that, ensuring that the STRT continues to reflect the regulatory landscape, which really is ever evolving. So what I intend to introduce today is I intend to discuss 4 key news and developments that have emerged since the last release of the STRT, and I'll explain how we as a committee have evolved the STRT to reflect each of these news and developments, so that again it continues to remain fit for purpose. So the one that I wanted to launch off with relates to supply chain links to North Korea. So North Korea's system of forced labor operates domestically and internationally. It's estimated that approximately 100,000 North Korean citizens work overseas under conditions of forced labor. Now this labor looks, it shares many of the same indicators that any instance of forced labor, looks like. So, these are workers who have their wages withheld, they've had their passports retained, they work very long hours, 12 to 16 hours a day, with very few days of rest, 1 to 2 rest days per month. Now, China and Russia continue to host more North Korean workers than all other countries combined. However, the U.S. the U.S. government has identified 39 countries who have known to, who they know to host North Korean workers within their own jurisdictions. And, this impacts a range of different sectors from, small electronics to apparel to footwear to construction. So, the wages, that the North Korean government collects from its overseas workers, they use to develop their weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs in North Korea. So the system of North Korean forced labor, it has received the attention, of course, of the US government. In response, the government has passed in August 2017 the Countering America's Adversaries through Sanctions Act, which makes it a violation of sanctions to import into the US goods mined, produced, and manufactured wholly or in part by North Korean citizens or nationals. So their labor, could relate to the manufacturing of at any stage of the manufacturing process. This is really what I want to call out here. So it could be at the raw materials level, or it could be later in the manufacturing process. And regardless of, at which point it came into play, it would put that entire good at risk of seizure and forfeiture at the US border. So the penalties associated with this act, they are severe, particularly because they apply to both corporations and to individuals as well. We do know that enforcement is in effect. So the US Customs and Border Protection Agency, they have taken action against at least 15 shipments. We don't have complete visibility because they don't always use the very public withhold release order, when taking this action. But based on a testimony that was given in October 2017, we know that they've taken action against at least 15 shipments. And again, that's from over a year ago. So in all likelihood, they've taken action against far more than that today. They've also sent requests for information on the due diligence practices of companies to at least 235 importers. Again, the statistic is stale, but it's the most up-to-date one that we have. It's from October 2017, and anecdotally, I can tell you that, I understand that companies continue to receive these requests from the US Customs and Border Protection Agency. So it really has become an important trade compliance issue for companies. So as a committee, we wanted to ensure that the STRT version 1.3, it supports companies with their compliance with CAATSA. How it does this is it collects data on the use of North Korean workers, either by the company who's responding to the STRT or any of their suppliers. The countries in the countries tab for the STRT includes all of those countries who are known to host North Korean laborers working on behalf of the North Korean government. We pulled those countries from a recent advisory issued by the US Departments of Treasury, State, and Homeland Security. The sectors tab of the STRT, it covers sectors at heightened risk for North Korean overseas labor. So Lydia earlier on noted, the public scoring guide that the committee has launched on the SRA website. Now, the next version of that scoring guide, which will correlate with STRT version 1.3, will show you exactly which questions within the STRT and which responses then correlate with supply chain links to North Korea. I do want to note, however, that the STRT it is for purpose in terms of generating a risk score for CAATSA. It's only an indication of compliance, however, and this is in part because we do know that the North Korean government, they do employ deceptive practices to evade sanctions. So as such, any companies who are using the STRT, they must accompany it with effective procedures and controls, really to ensure compliance with this particular act. So this now brings me on to, key learning number 2, and this relates to labor supply chains. And this is actually new research that has emerged very recently by 2 members of the STRT Development Committee. So this is Professor Crane from the University of Bath and Professor LeBaron from the University of Sheffield. And their research has shown that a key issue in tackling modern slavery is in understanding the labor supply chain. So they define the labor supply chain as consisting of a sequence of relationships a worker might go through to end up in work. So, if you think about these chains, they have multiple layers of intermediaries, agents, brokers. They often have subcontractors as well. And Andrew and Genevieve's research has shown that forced labor enters into the labor supply chain via multiple subcontracted labor agencies. So to get at that particular risk factor, we have augmented the STRT so that it better assesses for risk as it pertains to labor supply chain. We've included a question, asking whether the respondent prioritizes the use of ethical recruitment agencies. I would say this is a quickly, growing industry. Standards have emerged as well, that companies can then use to, see whether recruiters can use to see whether they meet the mark for ethical recruitment. And so the STRT now, leverages that emerging industry, by way of this question as to whether ethical recruitment agencies are prioritized. It also includes a new question on, whether the respondent conducts due diligence on their labor supply chain as well, and whether, they have knowledge of whether they're, if they do use recruiters, external recruiters to bring in workers, whether they have knowledge of whether those recruiters themselves subcontract out any of that work. Okay, so this is now news number 3, and it relates to indirect supply chains. So I define, we can think of indirect supply chains as goods and services that do not end up in the product or service that's being delivered to a customer. So, I've often heard of indirect supply chains, synonymously, being called goods not for resale, for instance. And so we do know that, companies, indirect suppliers often fall outside of the scope of corporate due diligence programs. This is despite workers operating within, industries such as, cleaning, catering, and security. They are vulnerable to slavery and human trafficking. These industries often use low-skilled, low-paid, temporary, and sometimes migrant workers, and this can even be in economies characterized by, minimal risk levels, ones that you don't often think of when you think of slavery and human trafficking. So to get at risk pertaining to indirect supply chains, STRT version 1.3, again, asks for more specific details about a company's due diligence practices as to whether they do cover their indirect suppliers as well. So now on to news number 4, and this pertains to risks as it relates to developed countries. So the Global Slavery Index, released some key findings this year. They found 3 main trends. One of them pertains to developed countries, and it found that the prevalence of modern slavery in highly developed, high-income countries is higher than previously understood. And in fact, it's within those contexts where slavery and human trafficking is actually the most profitable. So the UK government has invested, a fair amount of resources and time to better understand, the scale and the scale of modern slavery within their own jurisdiction. So if we look at them for an example, their estimates are that there's, over 10,000, there's tens of thousands of victims of modern slavery in the United Kingdom alone. So STRT version 1.3, it now better assesses for risks in developed country contexts. It does this by collecting data on whether the respondent conducts a formal vulnerability assessment of their workers to slavery and human trafficking. This is important because vulnerability can look differently in different contexts. So that's not all. We've also made a number of other, updates to the STRT. So those of you who are familiar with the template would know that the countries tab leverages the trafficking in persons report. So we've, of course, ensured that it now reflects the latest report, which was released in June 2018. We've also updated the sectors tab so that it reflects the latest research out of Alliance 8.7 on, sectors, again, of forced labor exploitation. Even beyond that, there are now references to, the French duty of vigilance law. We've, revised references to company to organization, given that slavery and human trafficking really is of relevance to any organization with a supply chain. It's not the exclusive purview or issue of companies. We've allowed equivalent policies for policy flowdowns, new answer options for some of the questions, etc. So this really brings us to the portion of today's webinar where we do want to give our call to action for those who are on the line. So just to give you some insights in terms of the committee's focus moving forward into 2019. As a committee, we hold calls every quarter, and of course an important focus of ours is to ensure that the STRT remains fit for purpose. So of course, a good portion of those calls is to discuss proposed revisions for the STRT with a view of releasing the next version of the STRT in Q3, Q4 of 2019. But, even beyond that, as a committee, we're also, always looking to issue new resources that users of the STRT can leverage within their own programs. So the risk scoring guide is one example of one such resource, and we have a number of others under development that we hope to release soon.
Okay, so just a quick overview of our development committee members. Currently, we're 27 individuals that are representing 21 organizations and growing. And so as you can see, we've quite a great sampling of companies and organizations that are involved. Now, this leads me to, we're always seeking passionate individuals to join our committee. And we are, again, I've been involved since last year, and it's been really exciting to see the growth and just all the great, the new ideas. And so we're always soliciting just new ideas for, and ways for outreach and growth. And so if anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out to me or to Sarah, and our information is here. You can email us directly.
This slide here, it just shows a few other resources that are available on the SRA website. I do, want to reiterate Lydia's call for, engagement, even if it's in terms of just providing some feedback on the STRT. As Lydia had noted, we really do take that feedback into heart and consider it and debate it and discuss it as a committee. And, we're always looking to strengthen the template. So really do appreciate any ideas. So please don't hesitate to send them our way. So this now brings us to the end of this, kind of slide portion of today's webinar. We as mentioned, would welcome questions from the audience. I do see that a couple have come in, so I can launch with those. So I see a question about Saudi Arabia. So, it says, what about Saudi Arabia? In the past few years, they have also withheld wages and passports of so many workers from Asian countries like Pakistan, India, and Nepal and Bangladesh. So absolutely, and so Saudi Arabia is a country that's also included in the countries tab, as are, I believe, most, if not all, of those other countries that the audience member listed there. Given that they are a tier, they are listed in the traffickings in persons report as not fully meeting standards issued by by the US government. And so the STRT in general, it does assess for and identify risk for slavery and human trafficking. It includes questions on known enabling factors and contributors to slavery and human trafficking, such as passport retention and overtime, and whether employment agreements are issued in advance of a worker, if a worker is migrating for work, whether recruitment fees are paid. And so it does assess for risk as it relates to certainly workers who are working in Saudi Arabia and in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so the next question that has come in, and maybe Lydia, both you and I can navigate this together. So there's a question that asks about the Responsible Business Alliance. So is the Responsible Business Alliance involved? What's the difference between the STRT and RBA's SAQ? Lydia, did you want to launch off by saying a few words?
Yeah, good question, and that is a question that we often get asked, and so definitely we are involved with RBA as seen as STRT at events. We were present at RBA and RMI, and so purely engagement at this time, and so looking forward to further engagement with RBA.
Yeah, and I'll, in terms of that question for, really what is the difference between the STRT and the SAQ that many RBA members use, I will call out that the STRT, it is a shorter survey. Today it's 23 questions. The RBA SAQ, on the other hand, it's quite a bit longer than that because it does assess for compliance with RBA's full code of conduct. The STRT, on the other hand, it's a risk-based survey, and it includes questions that do tie to legal compliance, like the federal acquisition regulation, for example. So in terms of, the feedback that I've certainly received from RBA members is, in them thinking about how they might leverage the STRT within their own programs, they felt that, it could be, useful, certainly in instances, let's say, where they need a quick turnaround in supplier responses, or for suppliers who they feel just aren't ready for the full RBA SAQ, or maybe they aren't eligible for the full RBA SAQ. So this could include suppliers, for instance, who operate outside of the electronics industry. It could be, indirect suppliers, for instance, maybe smaller suppliers, maybe even suppliers who provide goods or services as part of a U.S. federal contract, whereby, compliance with the federal acquisition really is a concern for that company. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. So a question that I see that's come in is the risk scoring prescriptive? So thanks for that question. Risk scoring, it is an important aspect of the STRT. It's great to collect data using the STRT, but risk scoring is central in being able to make that data meaningful and categorize suppliers for follow-up action. And so no, it's not prescriptive. The risk scoring guide, it shows, a couple possible risk scoring algorithms that companies can use to score the STRT, but really companies, those who are collecting the STRT can determine their own risk score, risk scoring algorithm on their own. And this was by design, given that different supply chains have different risks, and so companies, we have seen that companies, for instance, they want to give priority to certain questions over other, given that those are risks that are particular to their industry. So it certainly allows for that configuration. Okay, so we're at time here. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. As mentioned, please do reach out with any follow-up questions. Thank you for following along in our work, and appreciate you joining. And thank you, Lydia.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you.